Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Roberto Corona. I am an Italian anthroposopher and astrologer, and in this video we're going to talk about the upcoming full moon in Scorpio on May 1st. This is the second consecutive moon ruled by Mars, bringing to full expression the stellium in Aries we discussed in the previous video on the new moon in Aries on April 17. And in this regard, we also need to update the situation on the Comet front, because there's some interesting news and an extraordinary alignment with the new moon in Aries. Now, with this full moon, we officially enter the energies of Taurus, the heart of the spring season, which brings the forces of Mother Earth to full expression. And in fact, May is a month dedicated to the divine feminine. And below, I want to share with you the virtue to meditate on during the sun's transit in Taurus, indicated by Rudolf Steiner, which is balance that becomes progress. So let's start with the last news on the Comet front. If you remember, we have already talked about Comet A1, the so-called Easter Comet, which during the full moon in Libra crossed the zodiacal sign of Aries, a region of the sky heavily polluted by challenging astral forces. Now, the comet, which acted like a sort of cosmic scavenger, did not survive its perihelion with the sun, dissolving after its intervention. Now, apparently, the interventions brought by the first spiritual hierarchy to help humanity clearing the negative astral plane from this region of the sky are not over. These stelliums in Aries are indeed very heavy and are activating the problematic Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And in response to this heaviness in the sky, another comet is showing up, coming into action. It is the non-periodic comet C2025R3, which precisely during the new moon in Aries on April 17 will be perfectly aligned with the planet Saturn, just a few minutes away. So it is very, very aligned. This is a very close conjunction. It is always truly impressive to witness this precise alignments that operate according to a divine wisdom that we can only admire. Let's now take a look at the latest changes on the calendar, starting with the last new moon in Aries on April 17. On April 19, a very important date, the conjunction between the malefics is perfected, and it is still featuring in the chart of the full moon in Scorpio. On April 20th, the sun enters Taurus, and on the same day, Mercury joins the conjunction of the malefics, forming a triple conjunction. On April 24, Venus conjoins Uranus and surpasses it, unfortunately leaving Taurus her domicile to enter Gemini. On April 26, another key date of the month, Uranus definitely enters Gemini, creating an in-sign trine with Pluto in Aquarius. So we will discuss about this trine in detail starting in the summer. We also remember that the full moon in Scorpio coincides with the Buddhist Vesak, and since it falls on May 1st, it also coincides with the pagan festival of Beltane this year, which is a very intense date from the point of view of the etheric forces of the earth. Okay, let's tackle the chart of the full moon in Scorpio. The moon is located at 11 degrees and 20 minutes of the sign, shining between the stereo image of Virgo and that of Libra. The moon is a true focal point of the chart, as it opposes the bucket distribution of the planets that you can see distributed in the other half of the sky. The sun and the moon, of course, are in opposition. This is a full moon, and this opposition is closed in turn by a T-square configuration with Pluto in Aquarius, which contributes to create a lot of tension in the chart. A tension that we have already discussed. Since the full moon is ruled by Mars, Mars is in Aries, and as you can see, we have again another stellium formed this time by Neptune, Saturn, Mars, and Mercury. So in this case as well, Mars and Saturn, the two malefics, are still in conjunction. So this is the second time that this is happening. So we have two moons ruled by Mars, two moons with a stellium in Aries, two moons with a conjunction between the malefic planets, right? Now, on top of that, Mars's activation of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is also aggravated by a square aspect between Mars and Jupiter that is up here at 19 degrees Cancer. On the other hand, helping, I'd say, to harmonize a little bit the chart, we have Venus in Gemini that is creating a beautiful trine with Pluto. And we will see that there's a special relationship between these two planets that is also confirmed from a heliocentric perspective. So let's now tackle the meanings of the chart, starting as always from the physical significations. A full moon in Scorpio is all about revelations because it is a full moon. Revelations concerning the general meanings of Scorpio, such as power games, power dynamics, political intrigues, secret agreements that also concern finance, banks, the economic interests of the elites, and large capital movements. We also remember that Scorpio and Pluto represent oil. Therefore, the situation in Iran is strongly related with this moon. In turn, Pluto in Aquarius speaks of a revolutionary tension among the people that is ready to explode in a mass revolt. And this is because the recent ingress of Uranus in Gemini makes the trine with Pluto technically an in-sign trine, which means it now occurs in zodiac signs that are in trine with each other. Now, this leads to an activation and subsequent release, I would say, of this excess of Aries fire precisely through this configuration, through this trine aspect. Essentially, this full moon is a clear expression of the new moon in Aries on April 17 and indicates that these riots are related to the unsustainable economic situation caused by the rising of oil prices with serious consequences for international markets. Now, from a soul perspective, the full moon in Scorpio invites us to work on our shadows, particularly on anger. Therefore, if during the previous new moon it was a good idea to manage to contain excess anger and somehow vent it somewhere, channeling it positively, with this full moon instead, we are invited to work on ourselves and bring the light of our consciousness, represented, of course, by the full moon, into the darkness of our unconscious, represented, of course, by the zodiac sign of Scorpio. Now, in this regard, external situations thus become an opportunity for us to surface unresolved issues, unresolved trauma that affect our personal relationships. And this is indicated by both the benefic planets, Jupiter and Venus. So on the one hand, the trine of Venus in Gemini with Pluto in Aquarius seeks to bring to light what would otherwise outbursts into anger, and this is done through the calm and gentleness of Venus and the ability to communicate of Gemini. On the other hand, we have the square between Mars and Jupiter, and this indicates tensions with family members, our sense of belonging, and this leads us to work on that front as well, developing our capacity for forgiveness, being Jupiter, the great benefic. And finally, let's remember again the positive side of the conjunction between Mars and Saturn, which together represent the discipline that can handle all this fire energy to prevent it from causing damage. Now, moving on to the spiritual significations of the chart, we already indicated at the beginning of the video the positive intervention of Comet R3, which cleanses all this, I'd say, infernal fire of the lower astral plane from the regions of Aries. Now, these negative forces, we might even say apocalyptic forces, are represented by the feet of the constellation of the Virgin, where the full moon is located down here. So this is the Virgin, and as you can see below the feet, we have the full moon. So as we have indicated several times, this region is associated with the forces of the serpent that threatens Eve's heel, or with the regions of the seven-headed, 10-horned beast of the apocalypse. So the moon is moving on. The moon is moving out of these infernal regions towards the constellation of Libra. Now, this constellation invites us to develop a higher spiritual balance. Of course, it is the celestial Libra, right? The scales. And in anthroposophy, this balance is expressed as the balance between the Luciferic and Ahrimanic forces. Now, in this regard, if you remember, in the previous video, we discussed about the karmic consequences of an excess of Luciferic forces. Forces indeed linked to an excessively hot polarity. We have too much fire here. And this process that redeems the Luciferic forces is precisely indicated from a heliocentric perspective by the conjunction between Venus with the north node of Pluto. Now, the north node of Pluto is the point of contact between the sphere of Pluto and the orbit of the Earth, and it creates a sort of connection between Pluto and Earth itself. Now, in astrosophy, Pluto represents the development of the future forces of the Atma, that is, the forces of the spirit man that lead to the transformation of matter, the matter of the physical body, into completely spiritualized matter. And this is a true alchemical process of profound transmutation of the forces of the physical body itself. On the other hand, Venus is a planet strongly connected with Lucifer. In fact, planet Venus is the ancient abode of the Luciferic forces, a home they have now abandoned, having been cast down to Earth, and which Steiner tells us that the Luciferic forces are looking at Venus with an extreme nostalgia, because once back in the days it was their home, basically. Now, if we look at this Venus, we can also take a look at its heliacal phase. Now, this is what's called a Western Venus. So this means that this is an evening star Venus. It is a Venus that shines after sunset. And this is very important because it is called a Hesperus Venus. So it comes with a nocturnal, evening, humid quality that tempers down the Luciferic forces rather than exciting them. And in fact, the opposite occurs with an Eastern Venus, that is a morning star Venus. A morning star Venus, in fact, it is called a Lucifer Venus because it brings light, the light of the sun. Lucifer means bringer of light. So when it rises before the sun, it is a Lucifer Venus bringing the light of the sun, running before the sun, right? So we have here in the celestial scripture a form of alchemical transmutation that is a process connected with Pluto, the north node of Pluto. So alchemical transformation of what? Of these Luciferic forces represented by Venus to pass from these regions of the feet of the Virgin, that is very challenging, dangerous. We have the serpent here. So we move on from this region of the sky to the next one, that is where we find Libra, the starry Libra, where we have the balance of a redeemed kind of Venus. As always, thanks for watching. If you want to support my work, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell not to miss out on future astrological insights. I am Roberto Corona. See you in the next video.